I guess you'd call them trials of Jesus. It's kind of not much of a trial, but anyway, everybody has their mind made up to start out with. And of course, it all fits in with prophecy. You know that whether these people knew it or not, they were fulfilling prophecy made hundreds of years before. Verse 1. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver in the temple sanctuary and departed, and he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest took the pieces of silver and said, it is not lawful to put them in the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood. And they conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field and a burial place for strangers. For this reason that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. So everything they did fell right in with what Jeremiah prophesied. And let's look at that particular set of verses right there. You know, when we talked about this a little bit, not last week, the week before, it seemed that Judas, so when he saw him being condemned, it said he felt remorse. You know, I mean, that's feeling remorse. That's kind of like repenting, I think. But anyway, he takes the money back. It's about all he can do because they have Jesus in custody. And he said, here's your money back. He said, I betrayed innocent. Well, they didn't know nothing on us. They're not worried about it. But he throws the money down, and he said he goes and hangs himself. That was the remedy that he could think of, I guess. But you notice that the Jewish elders or Jewish leaders, they weren't going to let that money go to waste. Though they had paid for innocent blood, they said, well, it's blood money, so we can't put it back in the treasury. That's possibly where it came out of. I don't know where they got the money at, but so they took and bought the what's called the potter's field. Some of the older King James versions called it a seldom, I think, or ACELDAMA is in some of the accounts, which is the potter's field or the field of blood. And what was that particular field for? Poor people or strangers, people that didn't have a place to be buried. This was a place to bury them at. Did anybody here ever? I don't think anybody here is old enough to remember, but you may have remembered people talking about the poor farm. Anybody ever heard about people going to the poor farm?
Paupers.
Huh?
Paupers.
Paupers. Okay. Paupers farm or poor farm?
The people that went there were paupers.
Yeah, but the people went there were paupers, yeah. And Brother Byron from Leakwar, he talked about it. There's a fellow that said it's the saddest thing, but his father loaded up a guy and took him over and left him at the poor farm. That guy had run out. He didn't have anybody no relatives, no nothing, and nobody to help him. So they hauled him over and they took him to the poor farm. It was a place that they could live, and they worked and best they could, and they got by. You know, they got to eat. And but this is what this will be. It'll be a place for people who couldn't afford to buy a place to bury their dead. You know, today, basically, most of the cemeteries in this area are what they call free cemeteries. The biggest majority of them are. And you've got to pay for the funeral and all this, but you don't have to buy the plot in most cases. And they're all over this part of the state.
Oh, the field of blood.
Field of blood, yes. You know, because it was bought with blood money. But they fulfilled the prophecy. And you notice it says 30 pieces of silver, the price of the price of Jesus. And who set the price, did it say? Set by the sons of Israel. In other words, the Jews themselves were the ones that set the price.
Hey, Virgil,
Yes, sir.
my Bible says that was $52.80.
$52.80, okay? Some of the things I read before said that was a price of a slave in that day and time. You could buy a slave for $30. I say dollar, 30 pieces of silver. Whatever that, but yours said that far worth $52. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. And Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. You know, here's a man that's being accused of all kinds of stuff, and he doesn't answer at all. What does it say that the Ethiopian eunuch, he was reading the prophecy, and it talked about being led as a lamb, as sheep to the slaughter? He opened not his word, didn't open his mouth. That's what Jesus was fulfilling a prophecy. You know, the favorite question is, well, you know, how do you know? You know, when you read in the Old Testament, well, there's a prophecy about Jesus. How do you know? It tells us when we get to the New Testament, it tells us that that's what that. Sometimes it's right in the middle of a whole bunch of other stuff. And there would just be a line or two, and in the New Testament they say, that's Jesus is who they're talking about. In that particular sentence. This is what this, you know, and so the scriptures also said that, you know, the prophets didn't fully understand many times what they were prophesying about. They just knew the Spirit said, say this and write this down. You know, they couldn't picture it in their mind exactly what it was going to be like and what it was all going to be about. You know, someone can describe to you, say they made an automobile, and they can tell you all the parts they put in it, and the color they put on it, and the style they put on it. And you can think you understand it, but you probably don't until you see it. And then all the things they said they did, it all falls into place. Then you can see that exactly what they did and how they built it.
We're kind of the same way, a little bit. We're told a little bit about heaven, for sure.
Yes.
And what it's like, but we won't be able to, we'll be astonished when we get to see it.
Yes, you know, and I like to point that out, you know, in many cases, people, I see people really get hung up on the street of gold or streets of gold. It don't say streets, it says street. But you got to always stop and remember that John is describing a spiritual place, a place where spiritual bodies live. in terms that we can understand.
Right.
And he describes heaven in the most beautiful things that are in this world.
Can't even imagine
Can't even imagine.
the majesty of it.
That's right. A sea of glass, you know. All the different gems and things that he talks about being there. And the street of gold. You know, everything that's as beautiful things that we could ever, and many of them very rare things.
Gates being made out of one pearl.
Huh?
The gates being made out of one pearl.
Yeah.
Pearl.
And so, you know, like I say, he's describing a place where spiritual bodies live. You know, one of the scriptures says, we do not yet know what we shall be. We know that when he appears, we will be like him. So he said, we don't know. Even the Apostle Paul writes about being caught up in another heaven and said he saw things that was not, not lawful to talk about down here. And that's not a perfect quote, but that's what basically what it said.
Did you say he saw them or a man saw them?
He said man saw, but most people think he's describing himself, but he said a man did. He said he didn't know whether he was in the body or out of the body. But it said he saw things that was not lawful for people to tell about on this earth. Now at the feast of the governor, was accustomed to release from the people any one prisoner whom they wanted. At that time they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ? For he knew that because of envy they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ? They all said, crucify him. And he said, why, what evil has he done? But they kept shouting all the more, saying, crucify him. That's not the end of the paragraph, that's the end of my page right there. Let's stop right there and talk about it a second. What about this Barabbas? And so the other accounts that he, besides leading revolts and whatever, he was a murderer. He was just an all-around really bad guy. He deserved to be where he was. But yet, the leaders and whatever convinced them to ask for Barabbas to be released and not Jesus.
It's kind of like asking, the difference between a murderer and a jaywalker.
Yes.
Like which one's the bad one you want to
Yeah.
let go, And you would think someone that the governor knew hadn't done anything.
Yeah.
Would surely be the one they would choose.
Yeah.
But the prophecy
Well,
wasn't.
well,
that way.
the prophecy wasn't meant to be that way, was it? People like to say, well, Pilate did everything he could, but he didn't. But he fulfilled prophecy, but he didn't do everything he could, because he did have the authority to call a bunch of soldiers down and run all these people, run them out of town. You're causing a riot, and get them out of town.
It was back when he'd asked, was it Pilate that asked him what all he'd done and everything? And Jesus didn't answer.
They didn't answer, yeah.
But Pilate knew that he hadn't done nothing, so why didn't he?
Yeah.
I would have probably thought that, well, just tell me what it is, and then I'll make it okay.
Yeah.
Again, that wasn't the
Yeah.
way it was written.
Yeah, he was trying to figure a way out.
Yeah.
Hey, Christ could have done the same thing and released himself, but he did it for us.
Did it for us, okay? I think Benny does, there goes the whistle. Today's the 15th, next week is the 22nd. We'll start right along there, because I didn't hardly get through that set of verses.